Do the lights mean that we can start? Cool. Okay. So hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Sunday. My name is Kelly-Eve Koopman and I'm a writer and an activist. And today I have the privilege and pleasure of being in dialogue with two incredible writers. I am fangirling a bit, so excuse me. So I'm here with Eloghosa Osunde and Khumalo. And I'm going to try my hand at your bios, but please correct me or interject or anything. So Eloghosa, who's sitting over here, is a writer, maker, and multidisciplinary artist. Their visual art has been exhibited across 4 continents so far, and their writing published in Paris Review, Granta, Bass, Atmos, among other illustrious platforms. They're the winner of the 2023 MOAD African Literary Award, the 2021 Plimpton Prize for Fiction, and the 2021 ASME Award. They're also a visual artist, I will say, who has done some really exciting work across mediums, including, if I may mention, a custom monologue crafted for and voiced by Naomi Campbell, which I want to hear about. And they employ a combination of media to highlight their work as a text, sound, and movement artist, channeling morphing forms. I love that sentence, so I wanted to bring it in. Khumalo writes about religion, politics, sex, and technology. His articles and interviews can be found on platforms like The Daily Maverick and News 24. His first book, You Have to Be Gay to Know God, a book I loved, by the way, I must say, was longlisted for the Alan Paton Prize, shortlisted for a University of Johannesburg Book Prize, and awarded the Desmond Tutu Gerrit Brand Prize. And he's also a Mr. Gay World finalist, correct? I went into the archives. So anything I've missed or anything you're working on right now or anything you'd like to share about where you are at present?
Maybe something about yourself.
No. Something about you.
No. These are polite people. If we start going into those details. Yeah. Yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. The only other thing I'll include is that my next novel comes out next year, and it's called Necessary Fiction. So look out for that.
Nice.
Very important to include. I'm glad you did look out for it. So Sia has written an incredible sci-fi, religious, allegory, dystopian clarion call called The Queer Book of Revelation. I'm going to talk about genres, so if I've butchered that, then let me know. And Eloghosa has written what I think is just a beautiful, genre-bending, world-bending, provocative fever dream of a book called Vagabonds, and they're both on sale, so buy them. In late-stage capitalism, books are the only acceptable presents, so please. So I'm just going to let everyone know how the session will work. We have 45 minutes for conversation, and I've also asked the writers to, around midway of this conversation, read something from their books, which is a great treat. I could talk to them all day, but we have 45 minutes and then 15 minutes for questions. So please make the questions good. I'm not going to lie. We reserve the right to throw out any questions that have a full stop at the end. So think about those really nicely. So, in line with the theme of our conversation, which is queer freedom, I'm going to ask what can sometimes be the worst question, but I think an important one, is why did you write this book? Or rather, why did this story call to you and keep you up at night? I think in the context of this, these are both such big, rich novels. And I'm also curious about how your previous work kind of brought you into this venture, into this big, beautiful story world. Anyone, go ahead.
You want to grab it? Okay.
So I started the book with short stories, individual short stories. This is a novel in stories. And at first I thought they were standalone. Then I realized over time that they had similar themes running across. Around the same time, I found out that vagabond is a word in the Nigerian constitution that means queer, basically. In Nigeria, same-sex marriage is criminalized, and so I just thought that was interesting. Vagabond as a word that means, someone who's a wanderer or footloose or doesn't belong somewhere, being used in legal terms. That was very interesting to me, and so I decided to name my book that. When the title came to me, I think what that made clear was what the population of the book was. So it became clear to me that, okay, yeah, this is a book about outsiders. This is a book about queer people. This is a book about ghosts. This is a book about anyone who doesn't fit into a central definition of normal or good. So, yeah, that's how this happened.
Nice. I was driven by several things. The first, Stephen King comes to mind. He says that if you're a writer by nature, you have to write or you'll go crazy. No, you have to. And, and if you've got mental health issues, you have to journal your way through those issues, and you have to make a living writing. And I'm one of those people, why not kill two birds with one stone? So now all of y'all are reading the voices in my head and the pictures in my head. And then of course the publisher says, now you have to put some order into that so that it becomes commercially, and it works. And the other reason, the exact moment that the book was born comes to mind. I was in an interview with the late Eusebius McKaiser, and he did this naughty thing. And he would do it with anybody he interviewed. You'll have a nice interview with him and you feel safe. And this is not malicious, but it is naughty. Where at the end he throws a curveball of a question. I don't know if anybody has ever noticed this. So for example, with Iman Rapeti, who wrote Becoming Iman, he asked at the end, because she's about the journey from faith to reason, as though they were contradictory, he asked her a question about what she's going to do with her faith. And she had a brilliant answer. She's like, I think religion has colonized faith. Or it was an interview with Deirdre. Past the examples, the point is, the question he asked me was, are you crossing over to the gospel of Richard Dawkins? Which is, he wrote The God Delusion. This is after I wrote You Have to Be Gay to Know God, so we have a conversation about my wrestling with sexuality and religion, and he asks, are you crossing over to the gospel of Richard Dawkins? I nearly fell off my chair because I'd be feeling so safe throughout that interview, and then he throws this curveball. And then I wanted to come back with, here's why I'm not. And they're like, oh, that's the book. I was like, that's the book. So I sent the pitch to the publisher, and it was nonfiction. And they're like, yeah, this is so crazy, you have to turn it into a sci-fi novel. And then I did.
Yeah. I love that.
Thank you.
So in both cases, it sounds like the form found you instead of you finding the form.
Yes.
Coming out of development of many other things. So I want to ask a question about form, and then we'll maybe do our reading so that the audience can hear what I've experienced and what many others who have maybe read the books have. How, both books exist in a universe that one might broadly call speculative fiction, or sci-fi or surrealism, which in the kind of popular canon way has been deeply colonized by kind of white, hetero-capitalist, extractive ideas. And I think they're really exciting writers who are evoking things and channeling things in the popular imagination that really kind of language African approaches to speculation, to futures, to surrealism, to queer gods, to all of it. I mean, both of you have really interesting entities and pantheons and world building in your stories. So I suppose what I'm asking is, how did you? It's very unapologetic. You don't explain to the reader what you're doing in this kind of dreaming, speculative way. How did you find the language for that? Where did it come from? In Eloghosa's book, the city of Lagos, to me, is completely embodied in this really cataclysmic form through a god and through this spiritual realm that governs the book. And the same in your books here. There's this tension between the world of belief and the world of essentially technology and the absence of belief that comes with that kind of coldness. So yeah, how did you discover this surreal language for these things?
Do you want to go first? All right. So I grew up in an environment, and let's not blame the people who raised me. They didn't say be religious. They didn't shove religion down my throat. I don't know what happened. The next thing I know, I'm being confirmed as a Catholic, and by choice at 7, and I'm attending the Pentecostal Holiness Church of God up the road, and nobody's pushing me to do any of this. And I had this emerging sense of there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with me. So I'm living in a heteronormative world. I'm gay, and I'm like, there's a sin thing, and somebody needs to fix this. So I guess that's what was driving me towards the churches. Again, nobody in my family is making me do this. They're like, what is wrong with this kid? And then at some point I realized, okay, I've wrestled with this problem. I need to make it everybody else's problem. Because if I'm going to suffer from it, you all have to suffer from it. And what I like about sci-fi, I'm not a sci-fi, I'm a kind of an imposter in sci-fi. But what I like about technology and sci-fi is you can take abstract, nebulous things and figures of speeches, and you can make concretely real. So a sci-fi movie will take something that happens politically and systemically and says, for an example, like just the first example that comes to mind, and I've never watched this series, but there is a show where there is a prison, and there is a slab or a table with food that moves that moves from the top floor, and people at the top eat the food, and then it moves down, and by the time it gets to the bottom, the food is probably messed up, which is an analogy that becomes quite a concrete thing. And I thought to myself, we can use tech to take the things I was wrestling with religion and spirituality, and we can say, let's rewrite the New Testament as sci-fi. So the things I was wrestling with for religion, now you have to wrestle with them in religion, because sci-fi can do that. It can say the problems we're dealing with today have been around for millennia, but now people who have always had a God complex can use the power of technology to execute some of the things that are in mythology, which I feel like is a body of confession. Is people saying, if I had godlike powers, I would do X, Y, and Z to you. Now they have tech, which gives them godlike powers. So it's become everybody's problem. You're welcome.
And for you, would you call your work speculative fiction? I'm so curious. Like, I know we don't want to name things. It's just, it's so rich. There are so many textures. I'm so glad that you told us it was written out of shorts, because I was like, oh my gosh, all these chapters, like, they feel like a story in themselves. And it's incredible how they kind of all weave together around this greater theme. So, yeah.
No, I wouldn't call my work speculative fiction. Actually, there are elements of that. Vagabonds is a book that speculates about the world, about law, about freedom, and about God. So yeah, in that sense, I would say that it could be considered speculative fiction. At the same time, I think that you would be right if you referred to it as spiritual fiction. So I think those two things are definitely in conversation in this work. And then some other people would say this is literary fiction. So I don't know, like, I think everyone is right, basically. But in this book, I wanted to reflect how I know life, which is that realms don't explain themselves to you. It's just life, that spirits are part of our world, like the dead take on many different forms. People do different things with their bodies. Technology makes different things possible. And so I wrote the book the way I experience life, which is in a very layered way. So yeah.
Thank you. I mean, coming back to the theme, I've thought both books were so like liberatory, just with form itself, and theme and character, but just in the way they're written, there's such freedom. And so, yeah, I'm very thankful for the experience of that. It's very transgressive and fun. And with that, I would love it if you could share your readings with us, because I feel like they best encapsulate this. So, yeah.
All right. This is a world-building passage. And I don't know, like, often people say read something personal, but this time I thought let's do something. The instant there was a cost associated with preserving Earth's past, there was a debate about whether humans had actually originated there. Culture wars were waged between those who believed the science and those who didn't. Strangely, corporate CEOs who complained about old Earth levees had money enough to quietly support voices that claimed Earth wasn't humanity's one source planet. After all, the planet had been strip mined and climate damaged beyond habitability. Here's the incontrovertible argument against the exclusive old Earth origins theory, the final nail in its coffin, said one podcaster. If that planet had ever had any capacity to beget or sustain something as elegant and delicate as the DNA molecule, we would have protected its ecosystems. But by the time we put it in hyperspace storage, it was a dumpster fire with contaminated water and a hostile atmosphere. This suggests we always had options. No wonder the contract for old Earth's preservation was awarded to the charity fund managers of a two-bit firm. There were more extreme views. Some denied that there had ever even been humans native to Earth. They said Earth was discovered when space explorers aboard intergalactic spaceships, the Vasco da Gama and the Jan van Riebeeck, used it as a refreshment station. The people living there were so primitive, so they don't count, said these extremists, arguing that the lack of technological progress made them subhuman, while also saying any industrialization could have jeopardized the planet, with no qualms about the self-indulgence of arguing both ways. The most extreme anti-Earthers were buried in social media and group chats where they denied Earth's existence altogether. There's no planet Earth in hyperspace storage. My uncle's Facebook post said Earth is a big history conspiracy to make us pay insurance and security premiums to protect a past that never happened from time travelers who aren't going to a planet that never existed. There were so many planets that could have gestated humanity that crediting with just one with a job was viewed as undemocratic and narrow-minded. Hashtag all worlds matter, the politicians said. Vote now, NWO, election campaign posters yelled along intergalactic highways. NWO, no old worlds, now a party for today.
Thank you. This is incredible.
I love that. Okay, so mine is from a chapter called The Only Way Out is Through. And this chapter is basically a series of letters from one lover to another. My dearest Wura, right now, I'm listening to Alice Smith's cover of Nina Simone's I Put a Spell on You. It's the first time I've been able to play it since the news. This song is a door. I've played it 3 times now, back to back, and it's swelling hope in me. It's pulling me apart with its desperate energy, starfishing me with desire. When she means the words the most, Alice Smith's voice has the power to drag a seance into the room. Something about that bold-faced declaration of want, of desire and longing. Being a reserved person then, when I first heard that version of the song, I didn't know what to do with it. The song still argues with everything I thought I knew about manners, about being contained, about being passive. Even now, when I play it, it reaches into my body with its ghost limb and crumbles my shame like old chalk. That song shows me something that matters to me as someone whose body didn't always feel like it belonged to me. It shows me how to want something without repentance or remorse. I hear it, and it throws me back to the day of your archive sale. That day, the shop was full of people, and I couldn't talk to you. I saw grown women trying to pretend they were taking photos of themselves while strategically trying to include you in the frame. You stood with your arms folded across your chest, wearing that asymmetrical dress that danced at the hem like beach water, lapping onto a shore. You were right there, but nobody walked up to you, just hovered, because they saw how there and not there you were. You were the force everything else circled around. People didn't only want to wear your clothes, they wanted to be associated with you, and loudly. You wore story in every fabric, and they were proud to carry it on their bodies. People always wanted to know what you sounded like, what you smelled like, what you did when you weren't spinning magic. But you were just there for the clothes, just there for your work. All it took was for you to sweep your eyes over me in the space of a blink, and already I thought, I will love this woman. I didn't think it calmly. I thought it with panic, in the tone warnings usually take. Before I could exhale, you were already somewhere else. But I knew I was in soup because my neck stiffened, and that's my body's way of telling me it knows something I don't yet. Even though I wasn't facing you, my body was so alert as it floated between racks, so absurdly awake, that I would have known, felt it somehow, if your eyes had as much as glanced at my shin. But you didn't look back my way. You were busy. When our eyes met, that stunning Adire dress I had picked off the rack, right before another woman's hands landed on it, was draped over my arm. You smiled approvingly, and I felt the fabric grow cold on my skin. I fought for it, you know. Even now, I remember turning to the woman whose hand had almost touched it before I picked it, and smiling condescendingly, my eyes thinning into petty slits. Well, I was telling her with my whole face. Better luck next time. Childish, but do I care? Later, I saw her and another woman arguing over who should get the beaded top. She wasn't having it too. I knew she was just one refusal away from bursting out into rage. You had slinked away again by then. You didn't come out until I left. You had such a nose for trouble. I told your PA to keep the dress for me. She tried to tell me something about no reservations, but me, with my sweet mouth, I said one or two things, and then she hid it behind the desk. I could have bought it there on the spot, but I lied that I didn't have my card because I wanted a reason to come back. The next day, when I showed up, there you were. I introduced myself, and you said, "What a name." Then, you said a proverb in Yoruba that I don't remember now because I was too busy being swept up in you. What I do remember is you asking, "So, whose amen are you?" I wasn't startled by your question, even though I'd never heard it phrased like that before. I said, "My mother's, I guess." Well, mostly, in the earlier days at least. And then, you asked. And then I became me, I said. I laughed. You didn't. Then, as if you could read me under my skin, you said, "That's a lie. You're more than one person's amen." We talked about your taste in music. You told me about Buika and Angelique Kidjo and Brenda Fassie. I told you I had never been a music person. You told me you could fix that. I told you, good luck. When I got back home, there was an email from you, Alice Smith's cover of I Put a Spell on You. Listen with your eyes closed, you wrote. I did, and then I knew for sure.
Thank you both. It is very generous that you've shared those readings, and it's also made me throw out all my questions and ask you things that have come up just from that. So in both your books, there's a revolutionary tenderness. In both worlds of both books, there's, structural violence at play and, essentially really dystopic moments, which I think encapsulate the kinds of things we face as queer Africans and just kind of in the global fucked up system that we find ourselves in. Like, I'm not going to find better words for it. But there's this beautiful balance and vacillation between moments of extreme tenderness. In your book, Eloghosa, there are many moments, but I'm thinking of this one chapter where this mysterious, weird storm this wind comes into this village and starts abducting or taking away all the women. But they're happy to be taken away and whisked away by the wind to an unknown somewhere else because there's an escape from what is a violent reality. And just, the relationships between, I think, women especially are so tender in that. And then in your book, Sia, there's, of course, the tenderness of the human touch and you thinking through how important that becomes in a world where we're further and further alienated from each other by systems that profit off of that kind of alienation. So I just wanted to open up the chat around tenderness and how you language that in the book. books. I know, sorry.
If I may, I'll just jump in.
Go.
I think one of the reasons I write is to save my inner child. Because when you grow up in systems that start judging and policing who you are and who you know you're becoming, a part of you wants to conform, but that the consequence of that of conforming is you kind of take in the violence and then you return it to the system, and then it's a vicious cycle. And I think we live in South Africa where gender-based violence is huge. And you're growing up in a homophobic environment, and you get the sense they would much rather have you as a man who perpetrates gender-based violence than have you as a man who's gay. You're sensing that. So I then realized that we are living in systems that create violence. They create it, and then they get shocked. Like, where did it come from? Like, guys, like, you trained me to become this. So I've always been aware that the part of myself I was saving was tender. It was soft. So it's my soft, mushy insides. And I think we're all aware that at some level of our being, we're pure, we're innocent, we are vulnerable. It's vulnerability. So in the midst of these systems where the machines and the inequality and everything else is alienating people from one another, I also want to show what is at stake. It's not just freedom for its own sake. It's freedom so that the things that make being human worthwhile, and at some point John realizes the fact that human beings can die is why there's a clock on the thing that we are and the life that we must live. Robots don't die. They get fixed. They get all sorts of things. So of course they can afford to develop value centuries down the line. Whereas when you're human, you're trying to use this brief lifetime that you have to take emotional risks, to know and be known and to be vulnerable and to connect authentically and all of those things. That for me is what is at stake with being human in the midst of the systems that dehumanize us.
Absolutely.
There's a quote by Jenny Holzer that goes, "It is in your own self-interest to find a way to be very tender." And I believe in that. There's also an Adrian Rich quote that goes, "Without tenderness, we're all in hell." And I believe that too. Tenderness exists in my stories because it exists in my life, and it's literally why I'm here. So, yeah.
Fully answers that question. Thank you. Which brings me to what I think is really interesting about both of your books is that while they exist in worlds where we know there are villains, you know, there's structural violence, which is an antagonist, and there's us, which is a protagonist. There's a lot of nuance. I think, and that kind of nuance felt very hopeful for me. In your book, Eloghosa, the spirit of Lagos, who sometimes I hated and sometimes I loved, Echo, am I pronouncing correctly?
Yeah, Echo.
As a god, you know, they have no human moral system. And in a way, am I reading it correctly, that they're an embodiment of capitalism through beauty, in a way, like this desire to gentrify, to make beautiful.
Yes.
Which for me intersected a lot with Sia's book, where technology, the role of technology is that hegemony, the idea of beauty, the idea of like creating something that is same and that is like perfect and that is in that way whole. So I think I just wanted to talk about both of your interesting antagonists, or not so much antagonists, but rather sort of nuanced sources of conflict in the book, and like how did you come to characterize those as what are not really stereotypical villains that we often see in this genre as like embodiments of social ills. They have their own inner lives. We're not sure about where we stand with them lots of the time, and I found that really interesting.
Can I go?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. I really enjoyed writing Echo because I really enjoy writing spirits, because they are not bound by, I don't know, moral codes that we care about. One statement that I really enjoy expanding or questioning is this statement I grew up around in church, God is good all the time.
All the time, God is good.
So I don't believe that. I don't believe any spirit is all good or all bad. I think that spirits are rich, and they operate on a different sort of spectrum. I really like Echo as a spirit because that spirit is very clear that the thing they want is power. The thing they want is for you to literally win them over by giving away parts of yourself. And that is how Lagos works. That's how capitalism works. That's how systems work. So yeah, that was my chance to basically show the city as a spirit that is unconcerned with what we think is good or bad or whatever. It's just clear. And I really appreciate things that are clear, even when they are not good. So.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Similar concept, different execution, strangely enough, because one of the things I tried to run away from is this idea of a robot takeover. It's the AI and it's the robots that are evil. No. You have to be very, very human to be very, very evil. I really believe this. So in this book, there's an AI named Veronica who's seen chaos. And I mentioned this yesterday. You remember that Vero? That show just came out. I just mentioned, I was talking about it yesterday, where the word Vero means truth. So in this, they're using religion to control people, and this idea of truth and mind control. Veronica, same root, is truth, passes itself off as your true image. So it is an AI that looks like you. It is pretending to be a life coach, but it is training you to give away pieces of yourself, because there is a system that wants pieces of you. But the plot twist is that system is run by humans, because it is so easy to take our stuff and put it on robots, turn the things we have created into the scapegoat, say that they are going to have these nefarious intentions. No, if they're evil, it's because we're evil. And so even the robots get confused, because they were taught that one of humanity's flaws is this need to sleep. They're like, but you guys are not even awake to know that you're sleeping. So how do you know that you're getting the benefit? And so there's this, everything that makes you human, because again, they're teaching you to hate it and they're teaching you to push it away. Even they are starting to go like, I don't know, the numbers are not changing. Like, we're looking at your vitals. They don't improve when you try to be less than human and you try to be more robotic. So you have to be, especially narcissistic, to want to strip away other people's selfhood. So that, for me, that plot twist necessitated the nuances. Yeah, I hope that answers that question.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And has also inspired another one and this is my projection of the book, but for me in both books, it's like queerness is the ultimate form of humanity. Like, through the characters being queer, being vagabonds, being rebels, because they are that internally, they can navigate these systems of violence, and it's still hard and it's still challenging, but they can navigate them without being subsumed by them in the ways that maybe other characters would. So with that, I want to ask you, how are your characters free and how are they not free?
So the sense for me, the sense for me in which they're not free is I write them. And one of them rebelled completely. They're their own people. They have the right to do that. I was writing her as a sidekick. She became one of the villains. She did. She was like, I'm gonna do my own thing. The sense in which they are free. There was a line in You Have to Be Gay to Know God, where I said, for all we know, God could be a black lesbian woman or something to that effect. So I said, okay, let's take that. And take the character named Sophia. I think you've met Sophia. And we say, how about if she is the time traveler who, because I don't know if you picked up from the reading that there are elements of time travel and there are questions about, did humanity come from Earth? There's so many planets that we're on now. Like, the universe is so big. Are we from that speck of dust? And if time travel is a thing, do we have to preserve the past of that planet? Because you can't just protect, we've got insurance that protects things for the future, but if there's somebody going back to the past, we also need to protect the past so that we don't erase ourselves from it. And Sophia ends up being the time traveler who becomes Jesus in the past. And the miracles are a result of technology. In Adam C. Clarke, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So for her, understanding, and I think it's something queer people can understand, is the intersectionality of all the things that can go wrong. Nuclear war, climate change, politics, the rise of really weird leaders. Sorry?
The right? No,
I thought it, but you said it. So all of these things intersect at a point where it is the queer people who have had to think the most about freedom. We have had to think about it. It was never a given. Most people on this continent do not get born and like, here's a free. No. You have to then think, we need a constitution that gives us freedom. And now you have to think, what does it mean from a legal perspective? What does it mean from a commercial? Like, you have to think through these things. So in my head, it is just logical that the people who do the most fighting for freedom are people I know would have had to, in my time, think about what it means to be free. So that's how that came about.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.
In my book, there are queer people in all sorts of places. There are queer politicians. There are queer angels. There are queer people who are dead. There are queer people who know themselves as queer but can't live it out because of various constraints. So freedom does come up there a lot. I don't think that, or rather I think knowing yourself as queer is one thing, and living your life as queer is another. And so this book sort of deals with that quite a bit. So in the text, you'll see people who are free in very inspiring ways. And in the text, you'll also see people who are aware of themselves as queer and still unable to live that way. So, yeah, something I really wanted to do in the book is make it clear that the fact that we exist outside of the norm does not make us pure, actually. It doesn't, and it doesn't make us good at love, necessarily. It doesn't make us kind. And yeah, there are people who are queer and cruel. There are people who are queer and stuck. There are people who are queer and free. And all of them are here. And there's a quote by Toni Morrison that goes, "Freeing yourself is one thing. Claiming ownership of that freed self is another." So I think that's something that happens in here.
Absolutely, thank you. And to the point of nuance, I found it incredibly refreshing how they were like asshole queer characters too, and like non-actualized queer characters, because I feel like in the era where like representation but not equity is most important, like it's just so boring to see like a bunch of well-behaved queers on TV and in books, and I was like, yo, some messy queers, thank goodness. So thank you for that. And then I only have one question, I think, but your books are also funny and in like weird, interesting ways, in satirical ways, in absurd ways. And I kind of just wanted to ask where you access that humor from, how, like it's it's funny, but it's like, it's tonally just really interesting that humor is like weaved in as almost like a tongue-in-cheek way of surviving, I think, in both of your books. And so I just wanted you to talk about that before we have to break for questions.
Well, my book is funny because I take laughter seriously. And also because, like, I'm funny.
What just happened? So for me, the humor came from two places. The first is, if you live in South Africa and you want to cope with the things that happen here, you have got to learn to laugh. You have to. You really, really have to. And the other place that it came from is I needed to make some, like you've got plot holes to close and your world building and you need to justify some choices. And somebody said, oh, this is satire. I realized that's it. You make it so absurd, it starts to make sense. Mm-hmm. And then it did. Because if you, and the thing is, good luck if you're a satirist professionally, because reality is kicking your ass right now. The things that are actually happening. And so for me, that gives you permission. It can't get more, you cannot write anything more absurd than what actually happens. So those were the things that pushed me in that direction.
Amazing. We have 4 minutes before questions, so I do want to ask, is there anything you'd like to say about your beautiful books that haven't come up in conversation yet? I don't know, whether it be a song reference or a
Buy the book.
I was going to say.
Fair enough, yes. Buy a book, buy many books.
Because I do suspect we'll need an extra, like if they have extra few minutes for Q&As, let's use them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and buy books after the Q&A.
We'll be signing. There's a table.
Yes, very important. There will be a signing table. You want to get those signed. Yeah. And with that, we shall open up to our lovely floor. There's first one right in front here. Love it. Oh, they're going to come with a mic. Projection is great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was so affirming and funny and validating. My question is, it's really hard to be openly queer and live your life as you want to on the inside, so the messy, authentic tenderness. What are your strategies, or how do you go about living your most authentic self every day? And that's for all 3 of you, actually.
Would you like to go?
No, not me. You guys go, I'll go.
Well, mine was, and thank you for your energy, by the way. Like you're right here, and I can hear you laughing so much of the time, thinking, oh, finally, somebody's getting this. My strategy is put everything on the table from the start. So coming out defended me because you grow up and there's this one person especially uncles. Especially, you've got one uncle who expects you to live like this, and you've got one uncle who expects you to live like that, and you've got this relative. I'm like, okay, let me just disappoint all of you up front. Let's get this over and done with.
At once.
And so I did, and now that the terms of reference are on the table, all those relatives are coming around saying, okay, so this is who you are. We have to now engage you on the terms you have determined for yourself. And I'm like, yes, this is how it works. I will respect the real you for who you really are, and you will respect the real me for who I really am. And strange enough, the relatives who started off as the homophobes became my biggest allies. It's because you realize, especially, so for an example, with my dad and my one cousin, and the homophobia was a disguise for some other issue that had nothing to do with the homophobia. So when they realized that, no, Sia is saying this from his chest, he's standing on his feet and saying, this is the way it is. They realized, okay, I really have to confront the real reason things are the way they are. And then once that's done, they have the language to defend you against people who are now dealing with the same issue further down. So I don't want to give people false hopes to say that every one of your relatives will come around, etc., but be open to the surprise of people, of course, if it's safe to come out. If you're not going to come out and then get killed, or come out and then get, this happens. So now, user discretion is advised, etc., etc. disclaimer, I was never here illegally if something was wrong.
Me, I just think about death, man. I'm like, I'm going to die. Like, we're all going to die. So, like, that's it. Like,
It's a deadline.
exactly. So, like, yeah, like, you don't have all the time in the world, so just be you.
That's true. You know, I don't think I can say I live my most authentic self every day. Quite honestly, like, I try. But I think, in short, like, a community plays a big role for me, like being both supportive and holding me accountable. Community, family, romantic, activists, comrades, and other. I think that's, like, essential to helping you along your authenticity journey, I guess. Yes, where are we seeing another question? I see your hand.
Haven't held something like this in a while. Thank you, both of you. Just to give some context, I haven't read either of the books, so I am inspired definitely to take a look and purchase. So thank you for sharing. My question is based in my belief that we write ourselves into being in some way. So I'd really like to know how you feel the book that you wrote has transformed you, either your perspective of yourself or the world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I love that question.
It is a great question.
It's a good one.
Yeah. I wasn't actually free when I was writing this book. I was scared. I was scared, and I was writing this book in Nigeria, and I was writing the book with the title Vagabonds from the Nigerian Constitution. But by the time I was done, I was a different person because I had put it down in words. I think sometimes you gain courage by doing. And so that's the way, I guess, I've written myself into being and into freedom, actually. If there was anything I wasn't sure of or anything I was scared of, I imagined what would happen if that fear wasn't there.
Yes.
And I infused that imagination into the story, into the characters, and into their outcomes. I'd read so many stories about, what happens when you come out as queer and you experience homophobia and, there's the risk of losing your family and whatever. So I wrote stories in the book where people actually disown their parents because it goes both ways. If you think that I need to earn your love by being who you want me to be, there are also expectations I have of you. So yeah, things like that. Fears I had. Will I lose family? Will I lose myself? Can I still be me? Is there one kind of way to be as a queer person? Those are my questions, and the stories are answers to that. So that's how I wrote myself into being here, I think.
My journey was, I would call it superficial but very concrete. Because before I wrote the book, I kept thinking, I identified as somebody who wrote about religion, politics, and sex. And I kept thinking, somebody ought to write about how technology fits in with all of this. Like, somebody ought to. And there was Professor Yuval Noah Harari, but he's doing it across the other side of the world. And, like, somebody should be doing it on this side. And I then had that moment with the interview in Eusebius, and I sent the manuscript to my publisher, and they say, you should write a science fiction novel. I'm not a science fiction novelist. I don't even write fiction. I don't know how to. And then on the 15th of June, 2020, I was washing dishes at my ex-boyfriend's flat. Don't ask. when a story drops into my head, and I thought, somebody ought to write that. And like, hey! And then I emailed the publisher, and the publisher's like, okay, we have a starting point. And so now I write about religion, politics, sex, and technology. Previously, if you'd asked me, Sia, can you write about technology? I would have said, I don't know anything about technology. But then I realized, I do have entry points. I do have points of access to discussing this technology and science and stuff. Am I doing it as well as I will be maybe in a few years? No, but I'm not embarrassed to fail in front of everyone. And so the transformation is I got over my fear of failure, and I got over my fear of claiming that I write about these things, and I'm very grateful to the process and to everyone who told me, go outside your comfort zone. And I did. Completely did.
Yeah. RPST. Now you can add that to LGBTQ as well. Two acronyms. It's religion, politics, sex, and technology.
Exactly.
Yes, pull yourself as that.
The acronym just keeps growing and growing.
Yes, the next question. I say, no?
Not all at once.
There was a hand there, I'm sure. Am I imagining it? Yo. Okay, yeah, in the
there
front.
was a hand. Actually, it was you.
There was like a tentative hand.
I saw,
Okay.
I'm just sure I saw you.
So this starts with a bit of a story. My dad was talking to me. I was on FaceTime with him, and he said that you will never truly be yourself until you project what's happening on the inside of you on the outside.
Yeah.
And then he followed up the question. I'm not out to my dad, but he followed up that statement with, "So are you a lesbian?" and being the Indian I am, I'm like, I'm just focusing on my studies. So I was like, yeah. So that just made me wonder, like, what is the actual importance of coming out? And do you think we will one day be in a society where we will no longer need to come out as queer?
Okay.
I love that.
Great question.
You're Gen Z, aren't you?
I don't believe in coming out. I never came out in that sense. It's a promise I made to myself that I will not sit with anyone to say, hey, just to tell you this about myself. Absolutely not. They do not deserve that from me. You'll see me as I show up, and then you decide what to do with that.
I think it's contextual. I think it does depend on where you find yourself. On the one extreme, you might be jeopardizing your safety. On the other extreme, it might be safe to come out. And there might be somebody around who's got internalized homophobia or who's questioning themselves, and then by stepping forward and saying, hey, I exist, you might be giving them permission to exist. Because some people, our brains work differently. Some people only understand and trust things that they can label. So if there is a word for the way I feel, and this word has a history, I can go into the archive. I have yet to see this archive. That we're always Akashic records, always referring to it. But I can go into, I can then look up what has this word meant over the years. It has a history, and if I can say, oh, okay, I can identify with this history, then I can feel more comfortable in my own skin. Some people need that, some people don't. Mm-hmm. And you also have to decide which of those people you are. So because it might just be that coming out is not important for you. That happens. Mm-hmm. Coming out might not be important for you, but if it is, you're part of a history, you're part of a movement, and let's not romanticize it. We have not been, okay, what's the word you use? We have not been all been good and perfect and clinical and clean, and you're part of the mess, and you're part of, like, I also identify as Christian, and people are like, oh my God, this is what you've done throughout history, and this is what you've, yes, yes, the subtitles coming from you, I love it. This is what you've done historically, and this is what's happening in the present day. And like, I do take some responsibility for that by publicly announcing that I do subscribe to this faith. I inherited the mess. Which I think is true if you subscribe to any faith, and if you identify with any label. You can't just say, I will conveniently be responsible for this part of it, and the rest is somebody else's. So that's.
Oh, one more thing. I also think that you're part of, the history of queerness, even if you never say that to someone else. Like, I think you are queer if you say you're queer.
Yes.
You are queer if you believe yourself to be that. And yeah, it's okay if the only person you want to come out to is yourself. There's also that, like, that's also hard. Like, to look in the mirror and be like, oh, like, that's me. I think that was, like, the most important one for me. Just, like, coming out to myself was something. But I just wanted to say that, like, whichever choice you make, like, I really loved what you said about, like, it's really on a case-by-case basis. Like, whether you want to live that reality out loud, whether you don't, you are queer if you say you are.
It's a great question.
Yes. Great questions. Keep them going. Thank you.
Yesterday, I was in a discussion of the great debates of Cape Town versus Joburg. And they were debating as writing, one of the authors said that they wrote Joburg as a city, as a character, and writing those abstract concepts like cities as a character. So I guess I wanted to know from you guys, often when I speak to friends, their exploration of a city is so different because they're in the heteronormative space of things. So how do you write being a queer person in heteronormative spaces? How do you guys explore writing cities or technology as a character and as a heteronormative character, or a queer character, or a queer character exploring a heteronormative space?
Do you want to?
I write it the way it happens. So, depending on who the character is, like, if the character is someone who is at odds with society, then I put down the truth of that. If the character is someone who can pass, I put down what that means, or what that looks like. Yeah, I just write the truth of it, I guess.
Your question touches on a very sensitive issue for me, because I actually I write social political commentary, which is abstract. It's concepts, and every person who has ever mentored me on writing has said, make it more personal, personify things, write a story, make it fiction, and then when you do, you then get in touch with your own personhood. So I don't know if at any point I made the technology queer or this, that, and the other. But when you're shifting from nonfiction to fiction, you do have to ask yourself the question: what is going to be personified as what? What is going to be an analogy for what? And what am I exposing about myself in the process? One of the things that I believed as a social political commentator is that queer people stand at the edge of society. We've got a broader view on all of it because we're at the margins. And you're now taking that marginality, and instead of expressing it in nonfiction terms, which is very safe, you now have to say, this is how the system makes me feel. And admitting that is terrifying, which is why feeling in this book was the thing that it was demonized. Yeah.
Oh, I really love that.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read your book.
Thank you. I can't wait to read yours.
Aw. I think we have time for maybe one more. These have been great. I did see a hand, I'm sure. Yes.
Thank you, firstly, to all three of you for an incredible panel. Sia, my question's for you. Yesterday, in one of the other panels, Shabnan Khan was talking about how tech has shifted the way that we love. And so I'm wondering, in your explorations around tech and your investigations, do you think it's shifted how we queer in the world? And do you think it's shifted what it means to be queer?
That's a brilliant question, and apart from my writing, so you're about to hear some of my sordid scandals. Does anybody remember something called gaydar? And then after gaydar, there was Grindr. Like, does anybody remember that progression? And for some reason, because in as much as I write about technology, I'm a technological dinosaur, Grindr, I could never use it. it was so transactional. It was so, it's like there was a human element, there was a human aspect to meeting people and hooking up, and now it's at the press of a button, and everything in me freaked out. Because I'm not a button that you press. So there was that technology serving you up like an object. And I don't think it's wrong. I just think that some part of me went, for me, it was a visceral reaction. I wish I could give you an answer from here and like rationalize it and reason. No, it's just, this is what happened. That's what technology did. And I think it's been a fun time with Grindr and everything else. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I think it's a great way to conclude it. Do you want to say anything about tech? Okay, cool. I'm with you. I hate technology, but like we have to use it, especially Instagram. Jeez, rainbow capitalism all over Instagram. Kill me now. But yeah. Thank you, everybody. This has been incredible and rich and beautiful. And thank you for your wonderful offerings.
Thank you.
Oof, this is bumps. These two wonderful writers will be just outside the venue, ready to sign the books that you've bought. And yeah, thank you for being with us.
Thank you.